The moment Damien Moretti looked at the pregnancy test in my trash can, my life stopped belonging to me. Rain hammered against the floor-to-ceiling windows of Moretti Global like the city itself was trying to get inside. Manhattan looked blurred from the 42nd floor. White headlights smeared across wet streets. Neon signs flickered through sheets of rain. Somewhere below, sirens echoed between buildings like distant warnings nobody listened to anymore. I tightened my coat around my body and stepped out of the elevator with my resignation letter clutched so hard in my hand that the paper had started to bend. It was almost midnight. Nobody should have been there. But Damien Moretti was never nobody. The doors to his office stood partially open, warm amber light spilling into the dark hallway. My heels slowed against the marble floor, then stopped completely when I saw him. Damien stood beside the massive glass windows overlooking the city, one hand resting against his desk, the other loosening the dark tie around his throat. His white dress shirt was stained near the sleeve. Not enough to panic most people. Just enough to make my stomach tighten. Rainwater still clung to his black hair like he'd walked through the storm without caring what it did to him. Expensive. Dangerous. Untouchable. That was Damien Moretti. At 35, he owned half the city's shipping industry and enough politicians to make headlines disappear overnight. But none of that was what made people fear him. It was his silence. Damien didn't raise his voice. He didn't threaten. He just looked at people until they folded under the weight of his attention. "You're still here," he said without turning around. His voice was low, calm, controlled. "Like always." I swallowed hard. "I came to leave this on your desk." Finally, he turned. Steel blue eyes landed on the envelope in my hand, then slowly lifted to my face. God. Even exhausted, he looked unfairly perfect. Sharp jaw. Dark lashes. Tailored black slacks that probably cost more than my monthly rent in Brooklyn. Every inch of him looked built to dominate rooms without trying. "A resignation letter?" he asked. I nodded once. "I'm leaving." New York. Silence stretched between us. The kind that made breathing feel loud. Damien stared at me for 3 full seconds before walking toward his desk. My pulse stumbled as he passed close enough for me to catch the scent of rain, leather, and expensive cologne. He reached for a stack of files near the edge of the desk, but his movement paused suddenly. His eyes shifted downward. I froze. The small bathroom beside his office door was still cracked open behind me. And near the trash can, barely visible beneath crumpled paper towels, was the edge of a white plastic stick. My blood turned cold. No. No, no, no. Damien walked past me without a word. Every step felt slow. Deliberate. I moved instinctively. Don't. Too late. He bent slightly, picked up the pregnancy test, and stared at it beneath the soft office lighting. Positive. The air disappeared from my lungs. Rain pounded harder against the windows. Somewhere in the building, thunder rolled low and deep. Damien didn't react immediately. That scared me more than anger would have. His expression stayed unreadable as his thumb brushed once across the plastic edge. Then he lifted his eyes to mine. "How far along?" My throat tightened. "Damien, how far along, Claire?" The way he said my name made my knees weak. Quiet. Controlled. Dangerous because of how calm it sounded. I looked away first. 8 weeks. Another silence. Heavy enough to crush bones. Then Damien stepped closer. 1 step. That was all it took for the room to feel too small. "Tell me," he said softly, "that it's mine." The question should have been simple. But nothing about Damien Moretti had ever been simple. Rain slid down the glass behind him in silver streaks, turning the Manhattan skyline into something cold and distorted. I could hear my own heartbeat inside the silence stretching between us. Too fast. Too loud. Damien still held the pregnancy test in one hand, his thumb resting near the faint pink lines like he was trying to decide whether they were real. His eyes never left mine. "Answer me, Claire." I should have lied. Any smart woman would have lied. But after 2 years of working beside Damien Moretti, I had learned something dangerous about him. He always knew when people were lying. "There is nobody else," I whispered. Something shifted in his face. Not relief. Relief was too human for a man like Damien. This looked darker. Deeper. Like a decision locking into place behind those cold blue eyes. He nodded once, almost to himself. Then he placed the pregnancy test carefully on his desk like it was suddenly the most valuable thing in the room. "You should have told me." I laughed softly before I could stop myself. Exhausted. Nervous. "Told you what exactly? That your secretary got pregnant after one mistake either of us talks about?" Damien's jaw tightened. The memory hit me anyway. 4 weeks ago. A charity gala that ran until almost midnight. Too much champagne. Too many hours trapped together in the back of a black SUV, while paparazzi crowded the street outside the hotel. He had looked tired that night. Not dangerous. Just tired. And somehow that had been worse. Because for 1 hour, Damien Moretti had stopped looking like a Mafia king. He had looked lonely. "It was not a mistake," he said quietly. I stared at him. "You cannot seriously mean that." He stepped closer again. Close enough that I could see the rainwater still clinging to the dark fabric of his shirt. "Do you think I would forget touching you?" My breath caught. There it was. The thing about Damien that ruined people. He never raised his voice. Never chased. Never begged. He simply spoke like the world already belonged to him. "Including you?" I forced myself to look away first. "I am leaving tomorrow morning." "No." The word landed instantly. Calm. Absolute. I folded my arms tightly across my chest. "You do not get to decide that." "Actually," he said softly, "I do." Anger flashed through me fast enough to burn away the fear. "I am not one of your companies, Damien." "No." His gaze dropped briefly toward my stomach before returning to my face. "You are carrying my child." Thunder rolled outside the building, low and distant. Somewhere below us, headlights crawled through rain-soaked streets 20 stories beneath the office windows. Damien walked toward the wet bar near the far wall, poured himself a glass of water, then handed it to me instead of drinking it himself. The gesture should not have mattered. But it did. Because Damien Moretti never took care of anyone personally. Ever. "You look pale," he said. "I am stressed." "Because you are pregnant or because you are afraid of me?" I tightened my grip around the glass. "Both." For the first time since I had met him, something almost painful crossed his expression. Gone in a second. But I saw it. Damien exhaled slowly and loosened the cufflinks at his wrists. "Claire." His voice dropped lower. Softer. "Do you really think I would let you walk out into this city alone carrying my baby?" I swallowed hard. "You do not own me." His eyes held mine for 3 endless seconds before he answered. "That is exactly what I am trying not to do." Then his phone buzzed against the desk. One glance at the screen changed him instantly. The softness vanished. Cold steel slid back into his face. Dangerous. Controlled. Untouchable again. Damien answered the call without breaking eye contact with me. "Speak." Silence. Then his expression darkened. "Who told them?" My stomach tightened immediately. Because suddenly the rain outside did not sound romantic anymore. It sounded like a warning. The change in Damien happened so fast it made my skin go cold. 1 second he had been standing there looking almost human. The next he looked like the man whispered about in newspaper headlines and private clubs all over Manhattan. Untouchable. Dangerous. His blue eyes sharpened as he listened to the voice on the phone. "How long ago?" he asked quietly. Silence stretched. Then his jaw tightened. "Find out which employee talked." He ended the call without another word. Rain slammed against the windows hard enough to rattle the glass. I set the untouched water down carefully because my hands had started shaking again. "What happened?" Damien slipped his phone back into his pocket slowly. Too calmly. That scared me more than yelling would have. Someone leaked information from the company. About what? His eyes landed on me instantly. About you. My stomach dropped. That does not make any sense. You work for me. You disappeared from your desk twice this week for doctor appointments. Someone connected the dots. I stared at him in disbelief. You think people are gossiping because I am pregnant? No. His voice stayed low. Controlled. I think people are gossiping because you are carrying my child. The room suddenly felt too warm. Too small. I stepped backward instinctively. This is exactly why I was leaving. Damien watched me carefully, his expression unreadable. Claire. No. I shook my head quickly. You do not understand what happens to women around powerful men like you. Something dark flickered behind his eyes. I understand perfectly. Do you? My voice cracked despite my effort to stay calm. Because tomorrow every assistant in this building will whisper about me. Every reporter in Manhattan will try to get photos. And eventually people are going to ask questions about why your secretary suddenly disappeared. Damien walked toward me slowly, like approaching a frightened animal. You are not disappearing. That is not your choice. It became my choice the second someone outside this office learned about the baby. I hated how steady he sounded. Hated how easily he acted like control was the same thing as protection. I can take care of myself. Can you? His gaze dropped briefly toward my stomach again. Because from where I stand, you were preparing to leave the city alone in the middle of the night carrying my child while people are already asking questions. I opened my mouth. Closed it again. Because the worst part was, he was not entirely wrong. Damien moved past me toward his desk and pressed a button beside the phone console. Get the car ready, he said calmly. Sir? A male voice answered through the speaker. Now. My heartbeat stumbled. What car? Damien picked up his suit jacket from the back of the chair. You are not going home tonight. Excuse me? Your apartment building has no security. No cameras in the west stairwell. And your landlord sold access codes to paparazzi last year. I blinked at him. How do you even know that? Because I know everything connected to you. The answer came too fast. Too naturally. Damien paused after saying it, like he realized the truth had slipped out before he intended it to. Silence filled the office again. Heavy. Dangerous in a completely different way now. My chest tightened unexpectedly. You have been watching me? His jaw flexed once. Making sure you were safe. That is not normal. Nothing about my life is normal, Claire. Thunder cracked somewhere above the city, bright enough to flash silver through the windows. Damien stepped closer until the warmth from his body brushed against my skin. Listen to me carefully. His voice dropped lower. Softer somehow. I do not care about gossip. I do not care about headlines. But there are people who would use this child to get to me. Fear curled slowly through my stomach. Real fear this time. Not because of Damien. Because I suddenly believed him. He reached for my coat from the chair near the door and held it out toward me. Come with me. I swallowed hard. And if I say no? Damien looked at me for a very long second before answering. Then I will spend the rest of the night worrying about whether you make it home safely. The elevator ride down to the underground garage felt longer than it should have. Maybe because either of us spoke. Maybe because every mirrored wall reflected the same impossible image back at me. Damien Moretti standing beside me with one hand in his pocket, and rain still darkening the shoulders of his black coat. Calm. Perfectly composed. Like he had not just turned my entire life upside down in less than 20 minutes. I stared at the glowing floor numbers instead of looking at him. 28. 27. 26. My pulse still had not slowed down. You do not have to look terrified every time I stand near you, Damien said quietly. I let out a nervous breath. That would probably be easier if people did not whisper that you make senators nervous. One corner of his mouth moved slightly. Not quite a smile. Senators should be nervous. The elevator doors opened into a private underground garage lined with black SUVs and polished concrete floors that reflected the overhead lights like glass. The air smelled faintly of gasoline and rainwater. Two men in dark suits immediately straightened when Damien stepped out. Neither of them looked surprised to see me standing beside him at midnight. That somehow made everything worse. "Good evening, sir," one of them said. Damien nodded once. "Bring Claire's things from Brooklyn tomorrow morning." I stopped walking instantly. "My things?" Damien opened the back door of the SUV for me like this conversation was already finished. "You are staying at my penthouse for now." "Absolutely not." The two security men looked away so fast it almost would have been funny under different circumstances. Damien remained completely calm. "Get in the car, Claire." "No." Rain echoed somewhere outside the garage entrance while tension tightened between us like a wire pulled too far. Damien studied my face for several seconds before speaking again. "You are exhausted." "I am angry." "Both can be true." God, I hated how controlled he sounded. Like my panic was already calculated into his decisions. I folded my arms tightly across my chest. "You cannot just move me into your home because I am pregnant. Watch me." The words came softly. Smoothly. Somehow that made them even more dangerous. I stared at him in disbelief. "Do you hear yourself?" Damien stepped closer until his voice dropped low enough that only I could hear it. "Claire, if this were only about me, I would let you walk away tonight." My throat tightened unexpectedly. "But it is not only about you anymore." The softness in his voice caught me off guard harder than anger would have. He glanced briefly toward my stomach again before looking back into my eyes. And suddenly I understood something terrifying about Damien Moretti. He was not trying to control me because of obsession. He was trying to control the fear. His fear. Thunder rumbled outside the garage as cold air swept in through the entrance ramp. Damien removed his coat without hesitation and draped it over my shoulders before I could protest. The inside still carried warmth from his body. Leather. Cedarwood. Rain. "You are shaking," he murmured. I looked away quickly. "I am fine." "You keep saying that while looking like you might collapse." I hated that he noticed things like that. Small things. The kind nobody else ever saw. One of. The security men approached carefully. "Sir, the press is already outside the building." Damien's entire expression hardened instantly. "How many?" "At least 6 cars." My stomach dropped. "What?" Damien opened the SUV door again, and this time his voice left absolutely no room for argument. "Get in the car, Claire." Flashing camera lights suddenly burst through the garage entrance from somewhere above street level. White streaks cutting across wet concrete. My heartbeat stumbled hard. Damien reacted instantly. One hand moved to the small of my back, guiding me toward the vehicle with controlled urgency that somehow never felt rough. "Eyes down," he said quietly. "Do not look at them." More flashes exploded outside. Shouts echoed faintly down the ramp. Questions. My name. His name. Panic climbed straight into my chest. Damien looked at me once, his blue eyes colder than I had ever seen them. "This," he said softly, "is why you are coming home with me." The drive across Manhattan felt unreal. Rain streamed down the tinted SUV windows while camera flashes faded farther behind us with every block. I sat pressed against the leather seat, Damien's coat still wrapped around my shoulders, trying to understand how my normal life had disappeared in less than an hour. Nobody spoke inside the vehicle. The driver kept his eyes forward. The security man in the passenger seat murmured quietly into an earpiece every few minutes. And beside me, Damien sat perfectly still with one hand resting against his knee, his expression unreadable beneath the passing glow of streetlights. The city looked different through his world. Cleaner somehow. Colder. Private entrances instead of crowded sidewalks. Black cars waiting under covered awnings. Men in expensive coats opening doors before the vehicle fully stopped. This was not Manhattan the way normal people lived it. This was Manhattan owned by men like Damien Moretti. The SUV finally slowed beneath a towering glass building overlooking Central Park. No sign marked the entrance. No doorman smiled at arriving guests. Two men standing under the awning immediately stepped aside when they saw Damien through the window. The lobby alone looked larger than my entire apartment building in Brooklyn. Marble floors. Golden lighting. Silence thick enough to hear my own heels against the stone when I stepped out of the elevator onto the private penthouse floor. Damien unlocked the door with a fingerprint scan. The moment I walked inside, my breath caught. Floor-to-ceiling windows wrapped around the entire penthouse, revealing Manhattan glowing beneath the storm like another universe. White couches. Dark wood. Soft amber lighting reflecting off polished black marble countertops. Everything looked expensive enough to belong in a magazine nobody normal could afford. But somehow the place still felt empty. Too clean. Too quiet. Like nobody actually lived there. Damien loosened his tie as he walked farther inside. "You can take the guest suite." I stared at him. "You really planned this already?" I adapt quickly. "That is one way to describe it." He glanced at me over his shoulder. "You are angry. You moved me into your penthouse without asking." I asked. I let out a short laugh. "Damien, that was not asking." Something almost amused flickered briefly across his face before disappearing again. "The kitchen is stocked. Your vitamins will be delivered in the morning." I blinked at him. "My what?" "Prenatal vitamins." I stared openly now. "How are you already doing this?" Damien paused beside the kitchen island, slowly removing the silver watch from his wrist. "Because panic without preparation is useless." God. Only Damien Moretti could say something like that with a completely straight face. I set my purse down carefully beside the couch and suddenly realized how exhausted I actually felt. My body ached. My head hurt. And the emotional shock of the entire night sat heavy in my chest like wet concrete. Damien noticed immediately. Of course he did. "Sit down." "I am fine. Claire." His voice lowered slightly. Warning. Not angry. Worse. Gentle. I hated that gentle affected me more. Reluctantly, I sat on the edge of the couch. Rain rolled softly against the windows while Damien disappeared down a hallway without another word. A minute later he returned carrying a glass of water and a small white plate with crackers on it. I stared at him in complete disbelief. "You think crackers solve kidnapping? You are not kidnapped." He handed me the plate anyway. "You barely touched your dinner at the gala tonight." My mouth parted slightly. "You noticed that?" Damien's eyes held mine for one quiet second. "I notice everything about you." The air changed instantly. Warmer somehow. More dangerous. I looked down at the crackers because suddenly meeting his eyes felt impossible. "That is not a normal thing to say to your employee. You stopped being only my employee the moment I saw that test." My heartbeat stumbled hard enough that I hated myself for it. Silence stretched between us again while thunder echoed faintly outside. Then Damien's phone buzzed against the marble countertop. He glanced at the screen. His expression darkened immediately. "What now?" I asked quietly. He did not answer right away. Instead, he looked toward the rain-covered windows overlooking Manhattan before finally speaking. "Someone followed us from the office." The warmth inside the penthouse disappeared the second Damien said those words. "Someone followed us from the office." My fingers tightened instinctively around the untouched glass of water in my hands. Outside, rain blurred the lights of Manhattan into streaks of silver and gold beyond the massive windows. But suddenly the city did not feel beautiful anymore. It felt watchful. Damien picked up his phone again, his expression sharpening as he read whatever message had appeared on the screen. "Was it paparazzi?" I asked quietly. "No." His answer came too fast. Too certain. "Then who?" He looked at me for a long second before setting the phone face down against the marble counter. People who know my name tend to attract enemies. My stomach tightened. Damien, you are safe here. That is not what I asked? He exhaled slowly through his nose, like patience itself cost him effort. Then he loosened the top button of his dress shirt and walked toward the windows overlooking Central Park. The city lights reflected across the glass behind him, turning his silhouette dark and distant. 3 years ago, he said quietly, someone tried to use a woman close to me to gain leverage. Something in his voice made my chest ache unexpectedly. Not fear. Memory. I stood slowly from the couch. What happened? Silence stretched between us while rain whispered against the windows. Damien kept his eyes on the city below. She died before they could reach her. The room went completely still. My breath caught softly in my throat. Damien rarely talked about himself. In 2 years working beside him, I had learned more about billion-dollar mergers than I had about the man himself. Nobody mentioned his past around him. Nobody asked personal questions and kept their jobs long afterward. But now his voice sounded different. Lower. Heavier somehow. Who was she? I asked carefully. His jaw tightened once. Someone I failed to protect. My heart twisted painfully before I could stop it. Because suddenly I understood something terrifying about Damien Moretti. The control. The security. The constant surveillance. None of it came from arrogance. It came from fear. He had already lost someone once. And now he thought history was repeating itself. Damien finally turned toward me, blue eyes colder than the storm outside. That is why you are staying here until I know exactly who leaked information about the pregnancy. I folded my arms tightly. You still do not get to decide my life for me. No. His gaze softened slightly. But I will decide who gets access to you. God. The way he said things should not have affected me. But they did. Because beneath all the control and power and terrifying calm, there was something almost desperate underneath. Damien's phone buzzed again. He answered immediately. Report. Silence filled the room while he listened. Then his expression darkened sharply. How close? My pulse stumbled. Damien turned away slightly, one hand bracing against the counter. Double the lobby security tonight, he said quietly. Nobody enters this floor without my approval. The line disconnected. Damien. He looked at me instantly. What are you not telling me? For the first time all night, hesitation crossed his face. Tiny. Brief. But real. Then he walked toward me slowly until only a few feet separated us. A black sedan has been parked across the street since we arrived. I slid through my chest. You think they are watching the building? I know they are. Panic climbed instantly into my throat. Should we call the police? Something almost bitter flickered across Damien's face. The police already know who I am. That answer somehow frightened me more. I looked toward the rain-covered windows instinctively, imagining headlights below, strangers sitting in dark cars watching the penthouse. Watching me. Damien noticed the fear immediately. Of course he did. He stepped closer without hesitation, his voice dropping lower. Softer. Claire. I forced myself to look at him. Nobody is getting near you. The certainty in his tone should have comforted me. Instead, it made my heart beat even more unsteady. Because for the first time since walking into his office tonight, I realized something dangerous. Damien Moretti was not afraid for himself. He was afraid for me. And somehow, that terrified me more than the storm outside. Sleep should have been impossible inside Damien Moretti's penthouse. But exhaustion eventually dragged me under sometime after 3 in the morning while rain continued whispering against the windows overlooking Manhattan. I woke slowly to silence. Real silence. No thunder. No phones buzzing. No footsteps outside the bedroom door. Pale morning light spilled across the enormous guest suite, soft and silver against dark hardwood floors. For one disoriented second, I forgot where I was. Then I saw the skyline beyond the glass walls and remembered everything all at once. The pregnancy. The cameras. Damien. My chest tightened instantly. I pushed myself upright too quickly and nausea rolled through me hard enough to make me close my eyes. Easy. The deep voice near the doorway startled me so badly I nearly jumped. Damien stood leaning lightly against the open bedroom door, holding a white coffee mug in one hand and another smaller cup in the other. His black dress shirt sleeves were rolled to his forearms, revealing the silver watch back on his wrist. He looked like he had not slept at all. You scared me, I muttered weakly. You are supposed to be resting. You sound like a doctor. You sound stubborn. One corner of his mouth shifted slightly before he crossed the room and handed me the smaller cup. Tea. Not coffee. Ginger. My eyebrows lifted before I could stop myself. How do you know ginger helps nausea? Damien sat carefully on the edge of the chair across from the bed instead of beside me. The distance felt intentional. Respectful. I researched it at 4 this morning. I stared at him openly now. You researched pregnancy symptoms? I disliked being unprepared. God. Every time I thought I understood him, Damien did something that made him impossible again. I wrapped both hands around the warm cup while morning light spilled across the room between us. He watched me carefully over the rim of his coffee mug. Not controlling. Not cold. Just watching like he needed visual confirmation that I was still there. Did you sleep at all? I asked quietly. Enough. Lie. The faint shadows beneath his eyes gave him away immediately. Damien noticed me noticing and looked toward the windows instead. The car outside is gone. Relief loosened my chest slightly. So whoever was following us left? Maybe. His answer came too carefully. I hated that word instantly. Maybe. It sounded uncertain. Dangerous. Damien stood and adjusted the cuff of his sleeve with precise movements. I need to go downstairs for a meeting. About me? His gaze returned to mine immediately. About keeping you safe. My stomach twisted unexpectedly at the softness beneath the words. Damien walked toward the bedroom door, then paused suddenly like he remembered something. Your doctor appointment was scheduled for Friday morning. I blinked in surprise. You memorized my appointments? I memorized your schedule the first month you worked for me. The confession landed harder than it should have. Because he said it so naturally. Like it had never occurred to him to hide it. That is slightly terrifying, I whispered. Damien's expression remained calm, but something warmer flickered briefly behind his eyes. And yet you stayed working for me 2 years. Before I could answer, his phone buzzed sharply in his pocket. The atmosphere changed instantly. Damien glanced at the screen. Every trace of warmth disappeared from his face. What happened? I asked immediately. He answered the call without taking his eyes off me. Talk. Silence. Then his jaw tightened hard enough to sharpen the line of his cheekbone. When? My pulse stumbled. Damien listened another few seconds before ending the call abruptly. Damien. He slipped the phone back into his pocket slowly. Too slowly. Someone broke into your apartment last night. Ice flooded through my body so fast it almost hurt. What? The police believe they were looking for documents or electronics. My hands started shaking around the teacup. My apartment. Damien crossed the room immediately and crouched in front of me before I even realized I had stopped breathing properly. Claire. His voice lowered. Steady. Look at me. I forced my eyes toward his. You are safe here. But this time, instead of comfort, fear crashed through me harder than ever before. Because suddenly staying in Damien Moretti's penthouse did not feel temporary anymore. It felt like the only safe place left. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of silence and security updates whispered through expensive phones. Men in dark suits moved quietly through Damien's penthouse like ghosts, appearing and disappearing near elevators and hallways without ever fully entering the rooms. Every few minutes, another phone buzzed. Another low conversation. Another look exchanged between security personnel that stopped the second I noticed it. By noon, I could barely breathe inside the tension anymore. I need air, I muttered softly, setting down the book I had not actually been reading for the past 20 minutes. Damien looked up immediately from the tablet in his hands. Even sitting across the penthouse living room in a black dress shirt with the sleeves rolled to his forearms, he somehow still looked intimidating enough to silence entire rooms. The balcony is secure. I blinked. You already checked? Twice. Of course he had. I stepped outside anyway, wrapping my arms around myself against the cool Manhattan wind. The rain had finally stopped, leaving the city washed silver beneath heavy clouds. Central Park stretched below like something painted. Tiny yellow taxis moved through the streets far beneath the penthouse windows. For the first time since last night, everything looked almost normal again. Almost. I closed my eyes briefly and inhaled cold air into my lungs. You are thinking too loudly. Damien's voice came from behind me. I turned to find him standing near the balcony doorway holding 2 mugs. Tea again. Not coffee. You really decided I am incapable of basic survival now? I asked softly. You skipped breakfast. He handed me the mug carefully, his fingers brushing mine for half a second. Warm. Steady. Dangerous because of how gentle it felt. I looked away too quickly. Damien rested his forearms against the balcony railing beside me, close enough that I could smell cedarwood and clean rain lingering on his clothes. Manhattan wind moved through his dark hair, softening him somehow beneath the gray daylight. The police recovered security footage from your building, he said quietly. My stomach tightened instantly. Did they find who broke in? Damien's jaw flexed once. No faces. So they know nothing. They know enough to confirm someone searched your apartment specifically. Fear curled slowly through my chest again. I stared down at the city below us, suddenly dizzy from the realization that my old life no longer existed. My tiny Brooklyn apartment. My morning subway rides. Coffee from the corner deli downstairs. All of it felt impossibly far away now. Claire. I looked at him. Damien's blue eyes stayed fixed on my face, calm but impossibly focused. You are safe here. You keep saying that. Because you keep looking like you are planning escape routes. Heat rose unexpectedly into my cheeks because he was right. I had counted exits the moment I entered the penthouse. Old instinct. Survival instinct. Damien noticed my silence immediately. You think I am trapping you? Are you? The question hung between us while cold winds swept across the balcony. Damien looked toward the skyline for a moment before answering. If I wanted to trap you, Claire, you would know. The honesty in his voice sent a strange chill through me. Because somehow I believed him completely. Then what are you doing? He stayed quiet so long I thought he would not answer. Then, finally, softly, almost like the confession cost him something, he said. Trying not to lose another person I care about. My breath caught. The city noise below us faded into nothing. Damien rarely used words like care. Men like him spoke in transactions. Deals. Control. Protection. Not feelings. Never feelings. I turned toward him fully now. Damien! Suddenly his phone rang sharply inside the penthouse behind us. The softness vanished from his expression instantly. Gone so fast it almost hurt to watch. Damien answered without taking his eyes off me. What happened? Silence. Then every muscle in his body went completely still. When? My pulse stumbled hard. Damien listened another few seconds before ending the call slowly. Too slowly. What is it? I whispered. He looked at me with an expression colder than the winter wind sweeping across the balcony. Someone leaked photos of you leaving my building this morning. My stomach dropped. Photos? Damien nodded once. And according to every news outlet in Manhattan. His jaw tightened sharply. You are now being called my pregnant mistress. The article spread across Manhattan in less than an hour. I knew because my phone would not stop vibrating against the kitchen counter. News alerts. Unknown numbers. Messages from coworkers pretending to sound concerned while obviously fishing for information. One blurry photo had been enough. Me stepping out of Damien Moretti's building wearing his coat, while security surrounded us beneath the rain. The internet had filled in the rest on its own. Mysterious pregnant woman linked to billionaire businessman Damien Moretti. Secret affair exposed. Future heir? Every headline felt like another piece of my old life collapsing in real time. I stood alone in the penthouse kitchen staring at the glowing screen while nausea twisted through my stomach harder than it had all morning. Across the room, Damien ended another phone call with cold, terrifying calm. "No statements," he said flatly. "Anybody speaking to reporters loses access to my company permanently." He disconnected before the other person could answer. The silence afterward felt sharp enough to cut skin. I set my phone face down against the marble counter. "This is a disaster." Damien looked at me immediately. "No." His voice stayed steady. "This is temporary." I let out a breathless laugh. "Temporary? Damien, my face is everywhere right now. Then they will get tired of looking at it. That is not how scandals work." He crossed the room slowly until he stood directly in front of me, tall enough that I had to tilt my head back slightly to meet his eyes. "Claire." His voice lowered. Softer. "Look at me." I forced myself to. The storm outside had returned again, soft rain tracing silver lines down the windows while Manhattan glowed beneath dark clouds. Damien's expression stayed calm despite the tension radiating through the entire penthouse. "You did nothing wrong." Something painful tightened unexpectedly in my chest. Because nobody had said that to me all day. Not even me. I looked away first. "People are going to think I planned this." "I do not care what people think." "I do." My voice cracked slightly. "I had a normal life before this." The moment the words left my mouth, regret hit me instantly. Damien went very still. Not angry. Worse. Quiet. His eyes dropped briefly toward the floor before lifting back to mine. "And now you think I destroyed it?" Guilt twisted through me because somehow that sounded less like accusation and more like disappointment in himself. "That is not what I meant." "It is true." He stepped back slightly, one hand sliding into the pocket of his slacks while rain whispered against the windows behind him. "Your apartment is compromised. Your privacy is gone. And now every camera in New York knows your face." God. Hearing him say it out loud made everything feel terrifyingly real. Damien looked exhausted suddenly. Not physically. Emotionally. Like carrying responsibility for everything around him had finally started cracking something underneath the surface. "I should have protected your identity sooner," he said quietly. I stared at him. "You are blaming yourself for gossip websites?" "I am blaming myself because someone close to me is frightened." The softness beneath the words hit harder than shouting ever could have. Silence stretched between us while city lights flickered beyond the glass walls. Then my phone buzzed again. Another unknown number. Damien's eyes narrowed immediately toward the screen. "Do not answer that. It could be important." "It is not." His voice sharpened instantly. Protective. Controlled. Dangerous in a completely different way now. I looked at the number again before slowly setting the phone back down. "You really think somebody might come after me?" Damien held my gaze for a long moment before answering. "I think people become reckless when they believe they can use someone I care about." My heartbeat stumbled hard enough that I forgot how to breathe for a second. "Someone I care about." He said it so naturally this time. No hesitation. No walls. Just truth. Damien seemed to realize what he had admitted a second too late because something unreadable crossed his face afterward. But he did not take the words back. Outside, thunder rolled softly above Manhattan while the penthouse lights reflected gold against the rain-covered windows. And standing there in the middle of Damien Moretti's impossible world, I realized something terrifying. I no longer knew whether I was more afraid of the danger surrounding him, or the way my heart reacted every time he looked at me like I already belonged beside him.